You know how everyone tells you to find a job you love, but what does that even mean? For a lot of us, it's this long, winding, and sometimes really painful road. So, we're going to follow one person's journey from that absolute Sunday night dread to, well, you'll have to see. It's a story that I think might hit a little closer to home than you'd expect.
All right, picture this. It's Sunday evening. The weekend's pretty much over. Do you ever feel that little knot forming in your stomach? That slow-building dread as Monday morning just looms on the horizon? That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's got a name, the Sunday Blues. It's that feeling you get when you know the freedom of the weekend is about to get swapped out for the grind of the work week. And for the guy in our story, this feeling wasn't just some minor annoyance. No, it was like a compass, insistently pointing him toward a totally different life.
Okay, so our story begins not with some grand career plan, not even close. It starts with a series of, frankly, pretty terrible jobs, and a piece of advice from a very unexpected source that would just echo through the years.
Before he was even thinking about, a career, his resume was a collection of interesting choices, let's put it that way. He was a human target setter at a shooting range. If that's not motivation to get an education, I don't know what is. Then, he spent a summer basically swimming in fiberglass insulation in this brutal heat. And finally, he made it to the big time. He became a bank teller.
But the bank wasn't a complete wash. Now, he was a terrible teller. Always a few bucks short, constantly confused. But then there was Joy. She was the bright spot in his day. The one person who actually laughed at his jokes and would patiently explain for the 10th time the difference between a cashier's check and a money order.
And one day, Joy gave him this piece of advice that just stuck with him for years and years. I think she saw something in him that he didn't see in himself, and she knew he just didn't belong there. She said, "Don't settle, my little friend." Just two simple words, but they would become this recurring theme in his whole search for a life he actually wanted to live. So, what did he do with this profound, life-changing advice? Well, like a lot of us might do, he pretty much ignored it and chased the money. He was about to learn a really hard lesson. Success on paper doesn't always equal happiness in real life.
So he's in college, feeling totally lost, and he does what a lot of us do. He picks a practical major, economics, and his job hunting strategy, even more sophisticated. He just figured out who was hiring and who was paying the most. This, of course, led him straight to a high-paying, high-prestige job at an investment bank. He had officially made it. Or so he thought.
And this is where you see this huge disconnect, right? On the outside, he was the picture of success. He had the big salary, the fancy office, friends who were just green with envy. But on the inside, he was just withering away. The job was a constant performance, a daily struggle to pretend he was interested in something he truly, deeply hated.
He somehow lasted for almost 2 years, which he later called the longest decade of his life. And just when he felt like he was about to completely break, his boss did him a massive favor and let him go. He said it was a relief, like being put out of his misery. But here's the thing. Freedom came with a price. He was now completely adrift.
So what do you do when you're adrift and lost? You pick yourself up and try again, right? But this time, that old familiar feeling, the Sunday blues, it didn't just come back. It came roaring back with a vengeance.
His next stop was a marketing job at another bank. He was really hoping it would be different, a better fit. But pretty soon, it was the same old story. He was complaining constantly to his girlfriend, Anna. And she was patient, but her advice started to sound eerily familiar. You really need to find something you enjoy.
And this is where things took a really dark turn. The Sunday blues weren't just for Sundays anymore. No, that dread started to bleed into his Saturdays, becoming this constant, low-grade anxiety that just poisoned his entire weekend. The job wasn't just a job anymore, it was a thief, and it was stealing his life.
And then came this moment of clarity that was just terrifying. He looked back at his career and he had to admit it. The companies weren't the problem. His bosses had actually been fine, pretty supportive even. The problem was the work itself. He just didn't like it. And that was a very, very scary thought. I mean, think about it. If the problem isn't your boss and it isn't your company, but it's the very nature of what you do every single day, where do you even begin to fix that? The panic was real. So this panic sent him on this desperate search for answers. And you know how it is. So often, the breakthrough comes from the most unexpected place imaginable. He started interviewing anyone he knew who seemed happy with their job. I'm talking a lawyer, a consultant, a teacher. He even cornered the insurance adjuster who handled his car wreck.
But their reasons for loving their work, the intellectual challenge, helping people, creating order, it felt like they were speaking a foreign language. Nothing connected. He was more lost than ever, and a mild depression really started to set in.
And then a glimmer of hope. And it's from the most unlikely of places. As part of his marketing job, he was stuck in this mind-numbingly boring meeting with an ad agency. They were running a focus group for a new 401k plan. I mean, it doesn't get much drier than that. But then, something strange happened. The person running the focus group started asking these bizarre questions. Like, if this financial company were a person, what would they look like? It was ridiculous. But for the first time in a long, long time, he was interested. A tiny little spark in the darkness.
That tiny spark, that's all he needed. He decided to take this huge leap of faith, and what he discovered on the other side was, well, it was completely unexpected.
So he did it. He quit his banking job and took an entry-level position at that ad agency. The pay was terrible, and he was starting all the way from the bottom. But the effect was immediate and profound. The Sunday blues, they just vanished. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't dreading Monday.
And now we get to the climax of his story, the big epiphany. His very first assignment was for the smallest client you can possibly imagine, a friend of a friend's petting zoo, and his mission was to attract more petters. It was absurd, but as he dove into the work, he had this shocking realization. He loved it. The research, the strategy, the creativity. This silly, low-status job brought him more joy than all the prestigious, high-paying jobs he'd ever had combined.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? It's not about finding the perfect job title or chasing the biggest paycheck. It's about being open to finding that surprising, maybe even a little ridiculous activity that genuinely lights you up inside. It's about finding the work that makes the Sunday blues a distant memory. So I'll leave you with this question. What's your petting